Congratulations, you just signed a contract, all terms are agreed, and you're ready for home ownership. So there's a couple things that need to happen before you're ready to go to the closing table. So first of all, in the contract, you agreed to some terms, and we're going to look at the option period first. So the option period was negotiated between the buyer and the seller, and you were given a certain number of days to do inspections. So usually we see 7 to 10 days, but it has to be agreed upon by the buyer and seller, so it could be any certain number of days. The first thing you want to do after the contract is signed is hire a home inspector. You want to give the home inspector some time to get out there, and you want to allow him time to inspect the property with no distractions. You'll want to meet him the last hour, and the inspector will go over everything with you, and you'll have an inspected report. Now, you will pay the inspector when you meet with him, and that comes out of your pocket. So once you have the inspection report, you're going to want to make some decisions. You're going to want to decide, do you want repairs? Do you want contributions to closing, which is a reduction in your closing cost? You can use that money to make repairs yourself, or you can walk away. If you walk away, there's no questions asked. You don't have to give any justification. And in that case, you will not receive your option money back. So let's talk a little bit about earnest money and option money. So in the contract, you agree to a certain amount to pay for earnest money. In most cases, this is about 1% or 2% of the price of the home. In that case, the title company will then hold that money for you, and it is released dependent on the terms of the contract. So if you opt out of the contract, which means you walk away completely, both parties will have to sign the release of the earnest money. Now, option money, you also agreed on a certain number of days, but you also agreed on a certain amount. That can be anywhere from $150 to $200, or it could be more depending on the price of the home. Remember, the seller has to agree to the terms. And that money is also paid to title, where title holds it. So if you are going to leave the contract, that money does not come with you. That goes back to the seller. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the lender steps and the appraisal. So after option period is over, the lender is going to hire an appraiser to come out and appraise the home. Now, this can be an expense for you, the buyer, where you will have to pay perhaps at closing or perhaps upfront for the appraisal. And how this works is the lender does not know the appraiser or should not know the appraiser, and they put in an order. They put in an order in an appraiser pool, and the appraiser will pull the order and then go and conduct an appraisal, and then it's turned back in and given to the lender. That way, the lender doesn't have appraisers working for them. They're unsure, they don't know who it is. And then once the home, it needs to make value. So if the home makes value, you can go ahead and keep going through the lender process. However, if it does not make value, let's say it's a $250,000 home and it only appraises at $245,000, there's $5,000 difference. So you have options at that point. You can then ask the seller to lower the price of the home. You can split the difference between the seller and the buyer, the $5,000, each pays $2,500 each, or you can pay the $5,000 out of your pocket, and that's something that has to be negotiated. Let's talk about title work and insurance. So title work, the title company is examining the history of the property, making sure that no one else can claim ownership to the home, and then they will issue you title insurance. Now, the insurance on the home, this is going to be important to find out during the option period, what the costs are going to be. If you're in Brazoria County, you're in a coastal area. So that means you may have to have flood insurance and windstorm insurance, in addition to homeowners insurance. So you're going to have homeowners insurance on almost every single home. But because you're in a certain county, you may find yourself in a flood zone. This flood zone is determined by FEMA, and the insurance agent is going to know what the flood zone is, and they're also going to look at the elevation of the home. For example, if you're in a flood zone in Brazoria County, you need to have the home built up 2 feet. That's going to be something that the insurance agent is going to want to know. So It just depends on where you are. There's some homes that are out of the flood zone and some that are. And if they are in the flood zone, you're going to have flood insurance. Now, because Brazoria County is in a coastal area, you are going to have windstorm insurance also. So your total insurances could be homeowners, flood, and windstorm. If you're not in a flood zone, you'll have homeowners and windstorm. So it's good to research those prices and see what is going to be added to your payment, because your payment is made up of the principal and the interest, which is from the loan, the taxes, and then also the home insurances. Once all of this is settled, then you're going to get a final loan approval and a closing disclosure. So a final loan approval means is going to happen once they go over again. They're going to look at your credit report. Your lender's going to look at your credit report and is going to look at your income to make sure there has not been any changes since then. So during this whole process, you don't want to go out and buy a brand new car, because that's going to affect your debt to income ratio, and it can change the approval at the final end of the process. You're also going to have a closing disclosure. Now, in the beginning of this process, you should have been given an estimated closing disclosure, and now you're going to have a final closing disclosure. And you can look at those side by side to see how close they came, and if there's any changes, to know what those changes were in your closing statement. And then finally, it's time for the final walkthrough, which is always very exciting. You're going to walk through the home, make sure it is still in the condition as when you saw it. There was a paragraph in the contract that says a buyer is purchasing this property as is, meaning as is it was seen on that day. So aside from repairs, the home should still be in the same condition, and there should have not been any changes unless there were repairs made. And you want to check and make sure those are all done correctly. Then you're going to head over to the closing table. And this is so exciting because you're going to be signing a lot of documents, and there's a lot when there's a lender. But at the end of it all, you're going to have the keys. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos.